The diner smelled like burnt coffee and cinnamon, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a tired hum. Aura sat in the corner booth, the red vinyl cracked beneath her hands. She traced the splits with one finger, watching families gather coats and scarves, their laughter rising above the jukebox playing a tinny version of Silent Night. She had nowhere to go. Outside, snow drifted past the window in soft spirals, coating the empty street in white. Christmas Eve. She'd almost forgotten what that used to mean. Warmth. Noise. Her mother's voice calling her down the stairs. Her father's laugh, low and steady. Her little brother's sticky hands reaching for her sleeve. Gone now, all of them. 6 years this winter. The waitress passed her table for the third time, coffee pot in hand, but Aura shook her head. She'd nursed the same cup for 2 hours. The woman's smile was kind, but her eyes said what Aura already knew. Time to go. The diner closed at 9 on holidays. Aura pulled her coat tighter and stood, leaving a few folded bills under her saucer. She stepped toward the door, rehearsing the walk back to her studio apartment. Cold, dark, silent, just like last Christmas. And the one before that. The bell above the door chimed. A man stepped inside, snow dusting his shoulders, his dark hair damp from the storm. He was tall, broad across the chest, and he moved like someone who expected the world to make space. But it wasn't arrogance. It was presence, the kind that quieted a room without effort. Aura froze halfway to the counter. His eyes found hers immediately. Storm gray, sharp, searching. And something shifted. She felt it low in her chest, a pull she didn't understand, like a cord struck deep inside her ribs. Her breath caught. Her pulse kicked hard against her throat. The man stilled, his gaze locked on hers, and for a moment, the diner fell away. The jukebox, the waitress wiping down tables, the hiss of the coffee machine. All of it blurred. He inhaled slowly, his shoulders rising, and his expression changed. Shock first, then recognition, then something softer, something that looked almost like relief. He crossed the diner in 4 long strides. Aura stepped back instinctively, her hip bumping the edge of a booth. Her heart hammered. She didn't know him. She was sure of that. But the way he looked at her, like he'd been searching for years and had finally, impossibly, found what he'd lost. "Forgive me," he said quietly, stopping just out of reach. His voice was low, steady, and unexpectedly gentle. "I didn't mean to startle you." She swallowed. "You didn't." A lie. He had, but not in a way that felt dangerous. "I'm Kale," he said. He didn't offer his hand. He simply stood there, snow melting on his coat, his gaze never leaving hers. "And I know this will sound impossible, but I need you to hear me." Aura's fingers tightened on the strap of her bag. "I don't." "You're alone tonight," he said softly. Not a question, a knowing. Her throat tightened. She nodded once. "So am I." He paused, and something flickered across his face. Old grief, maybe. Or loneliness that mirrored her own. Or, I was, until 30 seconds ago. She frowned. "I don't understand." "I know." He exhaled slowly, and she saw him choose his next words with care. "This is going to sound strange, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I don't want to lie to you." Not from the first moment. Aura waited. Her pulse still hadn't steadied. "I'm what some people call an alpha," Kale said quietly. "And you're my mate." The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Mate. Ara blinked. Your what? My mate, he repeated, and his voice was calm, patient, like he'd expected her confusion. It's a bond, a connection, something we're born to recognize when we finally meet the person meant for us. She stared at him. You're serious? I am. You don't even know me. Not yet, he agreed. But I will, if you'll let me. Ara shook her head slowly, her thoughts spinning. This is crazy. You walk in here, and you just... What? Decide I'm yours? No. His tone didn't waver. Not decide. No. The bond doesn't ask permission. It just is. She opened her mouth to argue, but something stopped her. The pull in her chest hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. And the way he looked at her, there was no demand in it. No expectation. Just truth, and a kind of quiet hope that made her ache. I'm not asking you to believe me right now, Kale said gently. I'm only asking you to let me prove it. Tonight. Tomorrow. However long it takes. I don't, she faltered. I don't even know what that means. It means you don't have to be alone tonight, he said. Not if you don't want to be. Her breath hitched. I have a cabin, he continued, just outside town. Warm, safe. I'll make you dinner, give you a place to rest. And if you wake up tomorrow and decide, this is all too much, I'll drive you back myself. No questions. No pressure. Ara's hands trembled. She pressed them against her sides. Why would you do that? Because you're my mate, he said simply. And I've been alone long enough to know what that feels like. I won't let you sit in the cold tonight when I can offer you warmth. Something inside her cracked. She hadn't realized how heavy the loneliness had been until someone offered to carry it with her. I don't know you, she whispered. I know. He took one careful step closer, and his voice softened even further. But your instincts do. Listen to them. Do you feel afraid of me? She searched his face, the sharp line of his jaw, the storm-gray eyes that held no threat, only patience, the faint scar that crossed his left brow, the set of his shoulders, strong but not overbearing. No, she admitted. I don't. Then come with me, Kale said quietly. Just for tonight. Let me give you that much. Ara closed her eyes. She thought of her apartment, the silence waiting for her there, the hours she'd spend staring at the ceiling, remembering Christmases that would never come again. And she thought of this stranger who looked at her like she mattered, like she was something precious he'd been waiting for. She opened her eyes. Okay, she whispered. Relief swept across his face, softening every hard line. He let out a slow breath, and for the first time, he smiled. It was small, careful, but real. Thank you, he said. Ara nodded, her heart still racing. She didn't know what she was walking into, didn't know if this bond he spoke of was real or madness. But she knew one thing. She didn't want to be alone tonight. And maybe, just maybe, neither did he. Kale stepped back and gestured toward the door. My truck's just outside. I'll drive slowly. And if you change your mind at any point, you tell me. I'll listen. She believed him. She pulled her coat tighter and followed him into the snow. The cold bit her cheeks, but she barely felt it. Because for the first time in 6 years, she wasn't walking into Christmas alone. And that pull in her chest, that impossible, undeniable pull, it felt like hope. The truck was warm, but Ara's hands still shook as she buckled the seatbelt. She pressed them together in her lap, watching Kale settle into the driver's seat with practiced ease. He moved without hurry, checking the mirrors, adjusting the heat vent toward her before starting the engine. The gesture was small, thoughtful. It made her chest tighten. They pulled out of the parking lot slowly, the headlights cutting through the falling snow. The street was empty, Christmas lights glowing in windows they passed. Ara watched the town slide by, her breath fogging the glass. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what questions to ask first. Kale didn't push. He drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, his gaze steady on the road. But she felt his awareness of her, the way his shoulders angled slightly toward her, the way he kept the speed low and careful. "You said you're an alpha," she said finally, her voice quiet. "What does that mean?" He glanced at her, then back to the road. "It means I lead a pack, a community, people who look to me for protection and guidance." "A pack," she repeated. "Like wolves?" "Something like that." His tone was calm, matter of fact. "We're born with a dual nature, human and wolf. Most of the time, we live like anyone else, but the instincts are always there." Ara's pulse quickened. "And you think I'm like you?" "No." He shook his head. "You're human, entirely, but the bond doesn't require you to be anything else." She frowned. "Then how does it work?" Kale was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "It's recognition, a pull that runs deeper than logic. Some wolves never find their mate. Some find them and lose them. But when it happens, you know." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He turned onto a narrow road that led into the trees, the snow thicker here, untouched except for the tracks his truck left behind. "I walked into that diner, and I caught your scent, honeysuckle and rain, and I knew." Ara looked down at her hands. "I don't smell like anything." "You do to me." His voice softened. "You smell like home." The ache in her chest spread. She didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know how to hold something so fragile and enormous at once. "What if you're wrong?" she whispered. "I'm not." "But what if?" "Ara." He said her name gently, and she realized she hadn't told him. He'd known it somehow, the same way he'd known everything else. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to trust me yet. But I'm not wrong about this. And I'm not going to hurt you." She believed him. That was the strangest part. She believed him completely. They drove in silence for another few minutes, the trees closing in around them, tall pines heavy with snow. Then the road opened into a clearing, and she saw the cabin. It was larger than she'd expected. Solid timber and stone, with wide windows glowing amber from the inside. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a porch wrapped around the front, snow piled soft along the railings. Kale parked and cut the engine. He looked at her, waiting. "You live here alone?" she asked. "No." He hesitated, and something flickered across his face. "I have a son, Taryn. He's 5. Ara's breath caught. "You didn't mention—" "I should have," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to overwhelm you with too much at once." She swallowed. "Is he inside?" "He's asleep," Kale said. "My beta's wife has been watching him tonight. She'll leave once we're inside." He paused. "Taryn doesn't know about you yet. I wanted to give you time to decide if you're staying before I told him." Ara nodded slowly, a child. She hadn't expected that. But somehow it made Kale feel more real, more grounded. "What happened to his mother?" she asked softly. Kale's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he exhaled, his voice low and careful. She died, he said. 3 years ago. Childbirth complications. Ara's heart twisted. I'm sorry. So am I. He looked down at his hands on the wheel. She was my first mate. We were young. I thought we'd have a lifetime. He paused. We didn't. The grief in his voice was old but not faded. Ara understood that kind of loss, the kind that carved itself into you and never quite let go. Taryn doesn't remember her, Kale continued quietly. He's asked about her. I've told him what I can. But he's been without a mother most of his life. He looked at Ara then, and his eyes held something raw. I'm not asking you to fill that role. I'm not asking you to be anything you're not ready for. But he's part of this. Part of me. And if you're going to be in my life, he will be too. Ara's throat tightened. She thought of the little boy inside, asleep and unaware that his world might be about to shift. I won't hurt him, she said softly. I know. Kale's voice steadied. I wouldn't have brought you here if I thought you would. They sat in the warmth of the truck for another moment, snow falling around them in silence. Then Kale opened his door and came around to hers, offering his hand to help her down. She took it, his palm warm and steady, and followed him through the snow to the cabin door. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and wood smoke. The main room was open and comfortable, with a stone fireplace crackling low, a sofa draped in blankets, and a small kitchen visible through an archway. A woman stood near the hearth, pulling on her coat. She was older, kind-faced, with silver streaking her dark hair. She looked up as they entered, and her gaze went straight to Ara. Her expression shifted. Surprise first, then understanding, then a slow, warm smile. So it's true, she said softly. Kale nodded once. It is. The woman crossed the room and stopped in front of Ara, her smile deepening. I'm Marin, Kale's Beta's wife, and you must be the one we've been waiting for. Ara blinked. Waiting? For years, Marin said gently. She reached out and squeezed Ara's hand once, briefly. Welcome home, dear. Before Ara could respond, Marin turned to Kale. Taryn's been asleep since 8. No nightmares tonight. He'll be fine until morning. Kale's shoulders relaxed slightly. Thank you. Marin nodded, pulling her coat closed. She glanced at Ara one more time, her eyes warm. You're safe here, I promise you that. Then she slipped out the door, leaving them alone. Ara stood in the center of the room, her heart pounding. The fire popped softly. The cabin felt lived in, warm, real. Kale moved to the kitchen and began pulling mugs from a cabinet. Tea? Coffee? Tea, she said quietly. He nodded, setting a kettle on the stove. His movements were calm, deliberate, like he was giving her space to breathe. Ara unwound her scarf and set it on the back of a chair. She looked around slowly, taking in the details. A child's drawing pinned to the wall near the hearth. A stack of picture books on the low table. A pair of small boots by the door. This was a home. Not just a house. A home. You can sit, Kale said gently, gesturing toward the sofa. I'll bring the tea. She sank into the cushions, her legs suddenly unsteady. The fire warmed her face, and exhaustion swept over her all at once. She hadn't realized how tired she was, how much she'd been holding herself together. Kale returned a few minutes later with 2 steaming mugs. He handed her one and sat in the chair across from her, not crowding, not pushing. I meant what I said, he told her quietly. You're free to leave whenever you want, but you're also free to stay, for as long as you need. Ara wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into her palms. She looked at him across the firelight. This man who'd walked into her loneliest night and offered her shelter. This stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all. "I'll stay," she whispered. "Tonight, at least." Relief softened his features. He nodded once. "That's enough." And for the first time in 6 years, Ara let herself believe it might be. Ara woke to pale morning light filtering through curtains she didn't recognize. For a moment, panic flared. Wrong room. Wrong bed. Then memory returned in a gentle rush. The diner. Kale. The cabin. She sat up slowly, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. The guest room was small but warm, the walls honey-colored pine, a woven rug soft beneath her bare feet when she stood. Someone had left a folded towel and a glass of water on the dresser. Thoughtful, quiet. She dressed quickly, smoothing her sweater, running her fingers through her hair. Her reflection in the small mirror looked tired, but softer somehow. Less alone. When she opened the door, the scent of coffee and something sweet drifted down the hallway. She followed it, her steps careful, her pulse picking up as voices reached her. One low and steady, the other small and bright. She paused at the edge of the main room. Kale stood at the kitchen counter, a dish towel over one shoulder, flour dusting his hands. And beside him, perched on a stool, was a little boy with dark curls and storm-gray eyes that mirrored his father's exactly. Taryn. The boy was talking, his words tumbling over each other in that rushing way children had when they were excited. Kale listened with full attention, nodding, his expression soft in a way Ara hadn't seen the night before. Then Taryn looked up and saw her. He went quiet immediately, his eyes wide. Not afraid, just curious. Kale turned, following his son's gaze, and his face eased into something warm. "Good morning." "Morning," Ara said softly. She stayed where she was, not wanting to crowd. Taryn tilted his head, studying her with the unguarded intensity only children possessed. "Are you the lady Dad went to find?" Ara blinked. She looked at Kale. He set down the wooden spoon he'd been holding, wiping his hands on the towel. "I didn't tell him that. But yes, she is." Taryn's face brightened. "I knew it. You smell like flowers." Ara's breath caught. She glanced at Kale again and he gave her a small, almost apologetic smile. "He has good instincts," Kale said quietly. Taryn hopped off the stool and padded toward her, stopping a few feet away. He wore mismatched socks and a shirt with a faded wolf print on the front. His hair stuck up on one side. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ara." He tested it silently, his lips moving. Then he nodded, satisfied. "That's pretty. I'm Taryn. I'm 5.5. "Nice to meet you, Taryn," she said gently. "Are you staying for Christmas?" he asked, his voice hopeful in a way that made her chest ache. Ara hesitated. She looked past him to Kale, who watched them both with quiet attention. He didn't answer for her, didn't push, just waited. "I think so," she said carefully, "if that's okay with you." Taryn's grin split his face. "Yes, Dad makes pancakes on Christmas. And we put butter and syrup and sometimes berries if we have them." He looked back at his father. "We have berries, right?" "We do," Kale confirmed. "Good." Taryn turned back to Ara, suddenly serious. "You have to help. Dad says cooking is better with more people." Something warm unfurled in Ara's chest. She nodded. "I'd like that." Taryn grabbed her hand without hesitation and tugged her toward the kitchen. His palm was small and sticky, and she realized with a jolt that she couldn't remember the last time someone had held her hand like this. Trusting. Uncomplicated. Kale stepped aside to make room, handing her an apron from a hook on the wall. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said quietly. He held her gaze for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then he nodded. The next hour unfolded in a kind of easeful rhythm Ara hadn't expected. Taryn chattered constantly, asking questions about everything. Did she like snow? Had she ever seen a wolf? What was her favorite color? Kale moved around them with practiced efficiency, flipping pancakes, refilling juice, steadying Taryn's hand when he tried to crack an egg and nearly dropped it on the floor. Ara found herself laughing. Soft at first, then fuller. The sound felt strange in her throat, like something she'd forgotten how to make. Kale noticed. She caught him watching her once, his expression quiet and careful, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. She looked away, focusing on the bowl of berries Taryn had asked her to wash. When they finally sat down at the small table near the window, plates piled high, Taryn kicked his legs under his chair and beamed. "This is the best Christmas," he announced. Kale reached over and ruffled his hair gently. "Eat first, declare victory later." Taryn giggled and dug in, syrup dripping from his fork. Ara took a bite, the sweetness melting on her tongue, and realized she was smiling. Really smiling. The kind that reached all the way inside and loosened the knot she'd carried for years. She glanced at Kale across the table. He was watching his son with a tenderness that made her throat tighten. But then his gaze shifted to her, and the tenderness didn't fade. It simply widened, included her. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For this." She gestured vaguely at the table, the cabin, the warmth. "For not making me spend today alone." Kale's voice dropped, steady and sure. "You don't have to thank me for that." Taryn looked up, syrup on his chin. "Are you sad on Christmas?" Ara's chest squeezed. She set down her fork carefully. "I used to be." "Why?" "Because I lost people I loved," she said quietly. "A long time ago." Taryn's face grew solemn. He looked at his father, then back at her. "Dad says people we love don't really leave. They stay in here." He tapped his chest with one sticky finger. "So they're still with us." "Kind of." Ara's vision blurred. She blinked quickly, but not fast enough. Kale's hand moved across the table, covering hers. Just for a moment. Just long enough to ground her. "He's right," Kale said quietly. Ara nodded, not trusting her voice. Taryn tilted his head, studying her again. Then he slid off his chair, walked around the table, and climbed into her lap without asking. He settled against her like it was the most natural thing in the world, sticky hands and all, and rested his head on her shoulder. "You can stay with us," he said simply. "Then you won't be sad anymore." Ara's breath hitched. She looked at Kale helplessly, her arms hovering uncertainly around the little boy in her lap. Kale's expression softened further. He nodded once. Permission, reassurance. Ara wrapped her arms around Taryn carefully, holding him close. He smelled like syrup and sleep, and something sweet she couldn't name. Her eyes burned, but she didn't let the tears fall. "Not yet." "Thank you," she whispered into his curls. Taryn hummed, content, and didn't move. They stayed like that while the morning light grew brighter, the snow outside glittering in the sun. Kale rose quietly and began clearing plates, moving around them with a gentleness that felt deliberate, protective. Eventually, Taryn wiggled free, pronouncing that he needed to show Ara his toys, and he dragged her by the hand toward a corner of the room where a small basket overflowed with wooden animals and picture books. Ara sank onto the rug beside him, listening as he explained the name and personality of every single carved wolf in his collection. She asked questions, made suggestions, let herself be pulled into his world without resistance. And across the room, Kale watched them both, his chest tight with something he hadn't felt in years: hope. When Taryn finally tired himself out and curled up on the sofa for a nap, Ara stood slowly, brushing off her knees. She found Kale by the window, his gaze distant, his shoulders tense in a way they hadn't been all morning. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He turned, and the look in his eyes was raw, grateful, uncertain. "He hasn't taken to anyone like that," Kale said quietly. "Not since he was a baby." Ara's heart twisted. "He's easy to love. So are you." The words landed between them, quiet and certain. Ara's breath caught. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to hold something so fragile and so enormous at once. Kale stepped closer, just one step, his voice dropping. "I know this is fast, I know it's overwhelming, but I need you to know you belong here, with us, if you want to be." Ara looked up at him, her pulse racing, and realized something had shifted. The pulse she'd felt last night hadn't faded. It had only grown stronger, warmer, more real. "I think I do," she whispered. And when Kale smiled, slow and full of relief, Ara felt something she hadn't felt in 6 long years. She felt like she'd come home. The cabin was quiet when Ara woke the next morning, the kind of quiet that felt full rather than empty. She lay still for a moment, listening to the soft creak of the house settling, the distant murmur of voices somewhere below. Christmas had passed. The day after felt strange, uncertain. She dressed and made her way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and wood smoke. Kale stood at the kitchen counter, his back to her, pouring milk into a small cup. He moved with the same careful efficiency she'd noticed before, but something in his posture seemed heavier today, weighted. Taryn sat at the table, coloring with intense concentration, his tongue poking out slightly as he worked. He looked up when she entered, and his face brightened immediately. "Ara." "Look." He held up his drawing. A house. 3 stick figures standing in front of it. One tall, one small, one with long hair. Her throat tightened. She crossed to the table and crouched beside his chair. "That's beautiful." "It's us," Taryn said matter-of-factly. "You have to stay so it's real." The words hit harder than they should have. Ara glanced at Kale. He'd turned, coffee cup in hand, and the look on his face was complicated, tender, worried. "Taryn," he said gently, "we talked about this." "I know." Taryn's voice dropped, but he didn't look away from Ara. "But I want her to stay." Ara's chest ached. She reached out and smoothed his curls back from his forehead. "I'm still here," she said softly. "Right now, I'm here." "But what about tomorrow?" Taryn asked, his gray eyes too serious for 5 years old. Ara opened her mouth, but no answer came. Because she didn't know. She'd agreed to stay through Christmas, and now Christmas was over. The blizzard Kale had mentioned last night was forecast to arrive by evening. After that, she didn't know what came next. Kale set down his cup and moved to the table, pulling out the chair beside his son. He sat slowly, his gaze steady on Ara. "Taryn, why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Ara and I need to talk." Taryn's face fell. "But just for a little while," Kale said, his tone firm but kind. "I promise." Taryn looked between them, his lower lip jutting out. Then he sighed dramatically, gathered his crayons, and trudged toward the stairs. His footsteps echoed overhead a moment later, followed by the soft thud of a door closing. Ara sank into the chair across from Kale, her hands folded in her lap. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full of things neither of them had said yet. Kale spoke first. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for him to put that on you." "He didn't," Ara said quietly. "He's just being honest." "He is." Kale exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "But honest doesn't make it easier." Ara looked down at her hands. "You're afraid." He didn't deny it. "I am." "Of what?" Kale was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. "Of failing another mate." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unguarded. Ara's breath caught. She looked up, and the pain in his eyes was real, old, deep. "Kale." "I couldn't protect her," he said, the words rough. "Lena. Taryn's mother. I was there. I held Gabdema, her hand. I did everything I was supposed to do. And it wasn't enough." He paused, his jaw tight. "She died anyway, and I've spent 3 years telling myself, I won't let that happen again." Ara's throat burned. "That wasn't your fault." "I know that here." He tapped his temple. "But knowing it and believing it are different things." She understood that. She understood it more than he realized. "I lost my family in a car accident," she said softly. 6 years ago. I wasn't driving. I wasn't even in the car. I'd stayed home that night because I had a headache." Her voice wavered. "They went to see a movie without me, and they never came back." Kale's expression shifted. Pain. Recognition. "I spent years thinking I should have been there," Ara continued. "That if I had been, maybe I could have done something, changed something. But I wasn't, and I couldn't. And I've carried that ever since." "Survivor's guilt," Kale said quietly. She nodded. "I stopped believing I deserved to be happy. Because they weren't. Because I was the one who got to keep living." Kale leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intent. "Do you still believe that?" Ara hesitated. Then she shook her head slowly. "I don't know. I thought I did. But then I met you. And Taryn. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe I was allowed to want something again." "You are," Kale said, his voice steady and sure. "You are allowed." "So are you," she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression cracked. Not broke, just softened, opened. "I'm terrified," he admitted, "of letting you in, of losing you, of watching Taryn love you and then having to explain why you're gone." "I'm terrified too," Ara said, "of staying, of leaving, of believing this is real, and then waking up and finding out it wasn't." Kale reached across the table, his hand palm up. An offering, not a demand. Air stared at it for a heartbeat. Then she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady, grounding. "I can't promise you it'll be easy," he said quietly. "I can't promise I won't mess this up. But I can promise I'll try. Every day. For as long as you'll let me." Era's eyes burned. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," Kale said. "But maybe we figure it out together." She looked at their joined hands, then back at his face. The storm gray eyes that had found her in a diner on the loneliest night of her life. The man who'd offered her shelter without asking for anything in return. "I want to stay," she whispered. "I'm just afraid I don't know how." "Then we take it slow," Kale said. "One day at a time. No pressure, no expectations. Just us. Figuring it out." Ara nodded, her throat too tight for words. Overhead, Taryn's footsteps pattered across the floor, followed by the sound of something wooden clattering to the ground. A pause. Then a giggle. Kale smiled faintly. "He's probably building a fort. Does he do that often?" "Every chance he gets." Kale's thumb brushed across the back of her hand, a gesture so small and unconscious she wasn't sure he realized he was doing it. "He's going to ask again. About you staying." "I know. What do you want me to tell him?" Ara took a slow breath. She thought about the drawing Taryn had made, the 3 stick figures, the house, the life he'd imagined without even knowing if it was possible. "Tell him I'm staying through the storm," she said quietly. "And after that, we'll see." Kale's grip on her hand tightened just slightly. Relief? Gratitude? Hope? "That's enough," he said, and this time Ara believed him. They sat like that for a while longer, hands joined across the table, the morning light shifting through the window. Outside, the sky had begun to darken, clouds rolling in heavy and low. The blizzard was coming. But inside, the cabin was warm. Safe. And for the first time in 6 years, Ara let herself believe that maybe she was exactly where she was meant to be. The blizzard arrived that evening with a howl that rattled the windows and sent snow spiraling against the glass in thick sheets. Ara stood near the hearth, watching the storm swallow the world outside, and felt the cabin shrink around them. Not in a bad way. In a way that made everything inside feel closer. More present. Kale moved through the rooms methodically, checking the woodpile, securing shutters, filling kettles with water. Taryn trailed after him for a while, asking questions about storms and snow and whether the trees would be okay. Then he grew tired and climbed onto the sofa, burrowing under a blanket with a picture book. Ara settled beside him, and without asking, Taryn leaned into her side. She wrapped an arm around his small shoulders, and he sighed contentedly, his breathing evening out as she turned the pages. By the time she looked up, Kale was standing across the room, watching them. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes made her pulse quicken. "He's asleep," she whispered. Kale crossed to the sofa and crouched beside them, brushing a hand gently over Taryn's curls. "I'll carry him up." He lifted his son with the kind of ease that came from years of practice, and Taryn didn't even stir. Ara watched them disappear up the stairs, the soft creak of floorboards overhead, the quiet murmur of Kale's voice as he tucked his son in. When he came back down, the cabin felt different. Quieter, more intimate. Kale moved to the fire and added another log, then sank into the chair across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm filled the silence, wind howling low and constant. "We're going to be stuck here a while," Kale said finally. "Weather report says 3 days at least." Ara's chest tightened. 3 days. Alone with him. With Taryn. With this bond she still didn't fully understand. "Is that a problem?" she asked quietly. "No." His gaze held hers. "But I want to make sure you're okay with it." "I am." And she meant it. The thought of being trapped here didn't frighten her. If anything, it felt like permission. permission to stop running, to stay still long enough to see what this could be. Kale leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his hands folded loosely between them. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "What were they like?" His voice was gentle. "Careful. Your family." Ara's breath caught. No one had asked her that in years. Most people avoided the subject entirely, as if grief were contagious. But Kale didn't look away. He waited, patient. "My mom was a teacher," Ara said slowly. "3rd grade. She used to bring home stories about her students every night. She'd act them out at dinner, doing all the voices." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "My dad would laugh so hard he'd cry. He sounds like a good man." He was. Ara's throat tightened. "He worked construction. Big hands. Terrible at cooking. But he tried anyway, especially on Sundays. We'd end up ordering pizza half the time because he'd burn whatever he was making." She paused. "He didn't care. He just liked having us all together." Kale's expression softened. "And your brother?" "Sam." Ara's voice wavered. "He was 12. Into skateboarding and terrible jokes. He used to leave me drawings under my door when I was upset. Stick figures, doing ridiculous things. They always made me laugh." She stopped, the weight of the memories pressing down. She'd spent so long trying not to think about them. Not to remember. Because remembering hurt too much. But here, in the firelight, with Kale watching her with quiet understanding, it didn't hurt the same way. It ached. But it was softer. Bearable. "They sound like they loved you," Kale said quietly. "They did." Ara's eyes burned. "And I loved them. And then they were just gone. One phone call. One night. And everything. I'd been disappeared with them." Kale leaned forward and took her hand, the same way he had that morning. His palm was warm. Steady. "You didn't disappear," he said gently. "You're still here." "I know." She looked down at their joined hands. "But I didn't feel like I was. Not for a long time." "And now?" She met his gaze. "Now I'm starting to." Something passed between them, quiet and sure. A recognition. A shared understanding of what it meant to lose everything and still have to keep breathing. "Lena was kind," Kale said after a moment, his voice low. "That's the first thing anyone would have said about her. She saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it." He paused. "She wanted a family more than anything. When we found out she was pregnant, she cried for an hour. Happy tears." Ara's chest ached. "She sounds wonderful." "She was." Kale's jaw tightened. But the pregnancy was hard. Complications from the start. The healer said it was manageable, that she'd be fine. And I believed them. I had to. He stopped, his grip on Ara's hand tightening slightly. "She went into labor early. 36 hours. I stayed with her the whole time, held her hand, told her she was strong, that she could do this." "Kale, she was bleeding," he continued, his voice rough. "Too much, too fast. And I couldn't stop it. I'm an alpha. I'm supposed to protect my pack, my mate, my family. And I couldn't do anything but watch her slip away." Ara's vision blurred. She didn't let go of his hand. She held tighter. "Taryn was born," Kale said quietly. "Healthy. Perfect. And Lena got to hold him. Just once. She smiled at me and said his name. And then she was gone." The fire crackled softly. The storm pressed against the windows. Ara didn't know what to say. There were no words big enough to hold that kind of loss. "I blamed myself," Kale said. "For years, I thought I should have known, should have done more, demanded better care. Something." He looked at her, and his eyes were red-rimmed but clear. "It took a long time to accept that some things are beyond even an alpha's control. I'm so sorry, Ara whispered. So am I. He exhaled slowly. But I don't regret her. Or Taryn. I just regret that I didn't get more time. Ara understood that. She understood it with every broken piece of her heart. I used to think I was being punished, she said softly, for surviving when they didn't. Like I didn't deserve to be happy because they couldn't be. You don't believe that now? She hesitated. I'm trying not to. Kale's thumb brushed over her knuckles, slow and deliberate. You deserve to be happy, Ara. You deserve love, safety, a life that doesn't hurt every time you wake up. Her breath hitched. So do you. I'm starting to believe that, he said quietly. Because of you. The words settled between them, warm and fragile. Ara looked at him across the firelight, the sharp line of his jaw, the gray eyes that had seen too much loss and still held room for hope, the way he looked at her like she was something precious. Something worth protecting. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to let myself want this without being terrified. I'll lose it. Neither do I, Kale said. But I think maybe that's the point. We don't have to know. We just have to try. Ara's chest loosened. Just slightly. Just enough. One day at a time, she said softly. One day at a time, he echoed. They sat like that for a long while, the fire burning low, the storm raging outside. And somewhere in the quiet between them, something shifted, settled, took root. When Ara finally stood to go upstairs, Kale rose with her. He didn't follow, just stood at the base of the stairs, watching her with an expression that made her heart ache in the best way. Good night, Ara, he said quietly. Good night, she whispered. And as she climbed the stairs, she realized something had changed. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of staying. Not of this. For the first time in 6 years, she was ready to let herself feel again. The storm raged through the night and into the next day, wind battering the cabin walls in waves that sounded almost like voices. Ara woke to darkness, her heart pounding, unsure what had pulled her from sleep. Then she heard it again, a small cry from down the hall. She sat up, listening. The cry came once more, higher this time, laced with fear. Taryn. Ara pushed back the covers and moved into the hallway without thinking. The floorboards were cold beneath her bare feet, but she barely noticed. She reached Taryn's door and pushed it open gently. The little boy was thrashing in his bed, tangled in blankets, his face twisted with distress. His eyes were closed, but tears streaked his cheeks. Taryn, she whispered, crossing to him quickly. She sat on the edge of the bed and touched his shoulder. Taryn, wake up. You're safe. He jolted upright with a gasp, his gray eyes wide and unfocused. For a moment, he didn't seem to see her. Then recognition dawned, and he threw himself forward, wrapping his arms around her neck. It's okay, Ara murmured, holding him close. It was just a dream. You're okay. He shook against her, his breath coming in hiccuping sobs. She rocked him gently, one hand smoothing his curls, the other rubbing slow circles on his back. I couldn't find you, Taryn whispered into her shoulder. Or, Dad. I was alone and it was dark and I couldn't find anyone. Ara's chest ached. She held him tighter. I'm right here. Your dad's right down the hall. You're not alone. Promise? His voice was so small. I promise. She felt the moment Kale entered the room. The air shifted, his presence steady and warm. She looked up and found him standing in the doorway, barefoot, his hair mussed from sleep, his expression tight with worry. Taryn? He said quietly. Taryn lifted his head from Ara's shoulder and turned. Dad! Kale crossed the room in 2 strides and crouched beside the bed, his hand settling on his son's back. I'm here. What happened? Bad dream, Taryn said, his voice still shaky. But Ara came. Kale's gaze shifted to Ara, something unreadable flickering across his face. Gratitude, relief, something deeper. She did, he said softly. Taryn leaned back into Ara, his grip still tight around her neck. Can she stay? Just for a little bit? Ara looked at Kale, uncertain. He nodded once. Of course, she said gently. Kale rose and pulled the chair from the corner closer to the bed, settling into it. We'll both stay until you fall back asleep. Taryn seemed to relax at that, his breathing evening out slightly. Ara shifted carefully, guiding him back down onto the pillow, but he didn't let go of her hand. She stayed where she was, perched on the edge of the bed, her thumb brushing slow circles over his knuckles. Kale sat in the chair, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on his son. The storm howled outside, but inside the room, the silence was soft. Safe. Taryn's eyes drifted closed once, then opened again, fighting sleep. Sing something, he mumbled. Ara blinked. I don't really... Please? His voice was drowsy now, the fear fading. She hesitated, then began to hum. Softly. A melody her mother used to sing when Ara couldn't sleep. She didn't remember all the words, but the tune was still there, buried deep in her memory. Taryn's breathing slowed. His grip on her hand loosened just slightly. Ara kept humming, the sound barely audible over the wind outside. And when she glanced at Kale, she found him watching her with an expression that made her pulse stutter. Not just gratitude, not just relief, something raw, vulnerable, like he was seeing her for the first time and realizing she was already part of them. Eventually, Taryn's hand went slack in hers, his face smoothed, peaceful now, his chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of sleep. Ara eased her hand free carefully and stood. Kale rose with her, and together they moved toward the door. In the hallway, Kale pulled the door most of the way closed, leaving it cracked just enough to hear if Taryn called out again. Then he turned to her, and the space between them felt suddenly smaller, more charged. Thank you, he said quietly. You don't have to thank me, Ara whispered. I heard him, and I couldn't not go. I know. His voice was low, rough around the edges. That's what makes it mean something. Ara looked up at him, her heart pounding. The hallway was dim, lit only by the faint glow from the nightlight in Taryn's room, but she could see the way Kale's gaze moved over her face. Slowly, deliberately. He doesn't usually wake like that, Kale said. Not anymore. But when he does, he asks for me. Only me. Tonight, he asked for both of us, Ara said softly. He did. Kale stepped closer, just enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. And you came, without hesitation. Of course I did. Not everyone would, he said. Not everyone would care enough to. Ara's throat tightened. I care about him. I care about both of you. Something shifted in Kale's expression. The careful control he always kept in place slipped, just slightly, and she saw the longing beneath, the hope he'd been holding back. I'm glad you're here, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm glad you stayed. So am I, Ara admitted. They stood like that for a long moment, the storm a distant roar beyond the walls. Ara's pulse thrummed in her ears, her breath shallow. Then, Kale reached out, his hand lifting slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted to. She didn't. His palm cupped her cheek, warm and steady, and her eyes fluttered closed at the contact. Ara, he murmured. She opened her eyes and found him closer now, his gaze locked on hers. Asking. Waiting. She didn't know who moved first. Maybe it was both of them. Maybe it didn't matter. His lips brushed hers, soft and tentative, and her breath caught. He paused, his forehead resting against hers, giving her the chance to pull away. She didn't. Ara rose onto her toes and kissed him back, her hand lifting to rest against his chest. She felt his heart beating beneath her palm, fast and steady, and something inside her loosened. The kiss deepened, but only just, still gentle, still careful, like they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. When they finally pulled apart, Kale's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, his gaze searching hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you," he said quietly. Ara's lips curved into a faint smile. "I'm glad you did." He smiled back, and it reached his eyes this time. Full and unguarded, they stood together in the dim hallway, the storm still raging outside, the world narrowed to just the two of them. "Come on," Kale said finally, his voice soft. "Let's get some rest while we can." Ara nodded, but when she turned toward her room, Kale caught her hand. She looked back, questioning. "If you hear him again," Kale said, "wake me. You don't have to handle it alone." "I will," she promised. He squeezed her hand once, then let go. They parted at their doors, but Ara lingered for a moment, watching him disappear into his room. When she finally climbed back into bed, she felt different. Lighter. The storm could rage all it wanted. Inside, she was warm, safe, and for the first time in 6 long years, she wasn't afraid of what morning might bring. The storm broke on the 3rd morning, sunlight spilling through the windows in pale golden streams that made the snow outside glitter like crushed diamonds. Ara woke to the sound of Taryn's laughter drifting up from below, bright and unrestrained, and she found herself smiling before she even opened her eyes. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, following the warmth and noise to the kitchen. Taryn sat at the table with a plate of toast, telling his father an elaborate story involving wolves and dragons and a princess who could talk to trees. Kale listened with the same patient attention he always gave his son, nodding in all the right places, his expression soft. When Ara appeared in the doorway, Taryn's face lit up. "Ara, Dad says the roads are going to be clear soon. That means people can visit." Ara's stomach tightened. She glanced at Kale, who met her gaze with steady reassurance. "It does," Kale said, "and that means Ara's going to meet some of our pack, if she's ready." Taryn turned to her, his gray eyes wide and hopeful. "Are you ready?" Ara crossed to the table and sank into the chair beside him. "I think so." "Good," Taryn said decisively, "because they're going to love you. Dad said so." Kale's lips twitched. "I said they'd welcome her. That's different." "It's the same thing," Taryn insisted. Ara felt warmth bloom in her chest despite the nerves twisting through her. She looked at Kale across the table, and he gave her a small, private smile that steadied her. After breakfast, Kale moved to the window and stood there for a long moment, his posture shifting into something more formal. "More alpha. They'll be here within the hour," he said quietly. "Declan and Marin. My beta and his wife." "I remember Marin," Ara said. "She was kind." "She is," Kale agreed. "And Declan's been my second for 10 years. He's steady, loyal. You'll like him." Ara nodded, but her hands were trembling slightly. She folded them in her lap, willing herself calm. Kale crossed to her and crouched beside her chair, his hand settling over both of hers. "You don't have to be nervous. They're not here to judge you. They're here because they care about me and Taryn, and because they want to meet the woman who's been making us both smile again." Ara's throat tightened. "What if I'm not what they expect?" "You're exactly what we need," Kale said simply. "That's all that matters." Before she could respond, Taryn climbed into her lap without warning, wrapping his arms around her neck. "Don't be scared. They're nice. And if they're not, Dad will make them leave." Ara huffed a soft laugh despite herself. "Thank you, Taryn." "You're welcome," he said seriously. Kale rose, brushing a hand over his son's curls, and the look he gave Ara was full of something she was starting to recognize. Trust. Affection. The quiet certainty that she belonged here. The knock came less than an hour later, firm and steady. Kale moved to the door and opened it, and two figures stepped inside on a gust of cold air. Marin came first, her silver-streaked hair pulled back, her smile warm and immediate. Behind her was a tall man with broad shoulders and kind eyes, his presence grounded and calm. Declan. Marin's gaze found Ara immediately, and her smile deepened. "There you are." Ara stood slowly, Taryn sliding off her lap to stand beside her. She felt exposed suddenly, uncertain, but Marin crossed to her without hesitation and took both her hands in hers. "It's good to see you again," Marin said gently, "and even better to see you still here." "Thank you," Ara managed. Declan stepped forward, offering his hand. "I'm Declan. Kale's told me a lot about you." Ara shook his hand, surprised by the warmth in his grip. "He has?" "Enough," Declan said with a faint smile. "All good things, I promise." Kale moved to stand beside Ara, his presence a steady anchor at her back. Ara's agreed to stay through winter. "To meet the pack properly, I wanted you both to know first." Marin's eyes brightened. "That's wonderful news," Declan nodded, his expression serious but pleased. "The pack will be glad to hear it. We've been waiting a long time for this." "For what?" Ara asked quietly. "For him to let someone in again," Marin said gently. "For Taryn to have someone who cares for him the way you already do. For our Alpha to have a mate who makes him whole." Ara's breath caught. She glanced at Kale, and the look on his face was unguarded. Open. He didn't contradict Marin. Didn't downplay it. He just watched Ara with quiet intensity, waiting for her reaction. "I'm not officially his mate yet," Ara said carefully. "We're still figuring things out." "That's wise," Declan said. "But the bond is already there. Anyone can see it." Kale's hand settled at the small of Ara's back, warm and reassuring. "I'm courting her properly, the way she deserves. No rush, no pressure, just us, taking our time." "Good," Marin said firmly. "That's exactly how it should be." Taryn, who'd been quiet until now, tugged on Declan's sleeve. "Are you going to tell everyone Ara's staying?" Declan crouched to the boy's level, his expression softening. "I am, and I think they'll all be very happy to hear it." "They will," Taryn said confidently, "because she's perfect." Ara's eyes burned. She looked down, blinking quickly, but Marin's hand squeezed hers gently. "He's not wrong," Marin murmured. They stayed for tea, the conversation flowing easily, despite Ara's initial nerves. Marin asked gentle questions about where Ara was from, what she liked, how she was adjusting to the cabin. Declan spoke less, but his presence was steady and kind, and Ara found herself relaxing despite the weight of what was happening. When they finally stood to leave, Marin hugged Ara tightly. "You're part of us now," she said quietly, "whether you feel it yet or not. And we take care of our own." "Thank you," Ara whispered. Declan shook Kale's hand, then turned to Ara. "If you need anything, you let us know. We're here." "I will," Ara promised. After they left, the cabin felt quieter again, but not emptier. Warmer, somehow, more solid. Taryn tugged on Ara's hand. "See? I told you they'd love you." Ara smiled down at him, her chest full. "You were right." "I'm always right," Taryn said matter-of-factly, and darted off toward his toys. Kale moved to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "How are you feeling?" Ara took a slow breath. Overwhelmed. But in a good way, I think. They meant what they said, Kale told her. You're part of the pack now, part of this family, if you want to be. Ara looked up at him, her pulse quickening. I do. Something in Kale's expression shifted, deepened. He reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Then stay, not just through winter. Stay for real. Ara's breath hitched. Kale. I know it's fast, he said quietly. I know we're still figuring this out. But I need you to know that I'm all in. I want this. I want you. And I'm willing to wait as long as you need to be sure. But I'm not going anywhere. And neither is he. He nodded toward Taryn, who was humming to himself as he built a tower from wooden blocks. Ara's eyes blurred. She looked at the little boy who'd climbed into her lap without hesitation. At the man who'd found her on the loneliest night of her life and offered her a home. At the life she'd been too afraid to believe she deserved. I'm staying, she whispered. For real. Kale's smile was slow and full of relief. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Ara let herself sink into the embrace, let herself feel the warmth and safety she'd spent 6 years believing she'd never have again. Across the room, Taryn looked up and grinned. Told you, he said to no one in particular. And outside, the first light of the new year spilled across the snow, bright and clean and full of hope.